We are being joined by Dr. Glenn Dyson, who is joining us from Oslo. He is a professor of international relations at the University of Southeastern Norway and is also an editor at the Russia in Global Affairs Journal. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Let me begin by asking you, Trump has announced the date. He will be talking to Putin on Tuesday. What can we expect?
Well, I think the main three issues has to be neutrality for Ukraine, what to do about contested territory, that is which land belongs to each side, and finally the rights of the Russian minorities who will still live within Ukrainian borders. Keep in mind that this began with Trump administration first getting Ukraine to the negotiation table, that is to agree on the principle of a ceasefire. Now, what they need to do now with the Russians is the next step in this process, which is to organize the conditions or the formalities around the ceasefire, because they need to have some political agreements towards the end of this. They need to, who would observe it, what would happen if someone would breach it. But overall, the key problem for the Russians is they are very reluctant to accept any ceasefire without any purpose behind it, if it doesn't address the underlying tensions or source of the conflict, which has to be addressed. So I think this is simply moving along with the peace process.
Right. And well, while Ukraine is adamant on getting a NATO membership with ally nations like UK and France backing him, Russia has clearly gone against it. That being said, what kind of security guarantees can this talk come out with in the context of Ukraine?
Likely none, because the main reason why Russia invaded to begin with was because since 2014, since the government in Ukraine was toppled with the support of NATO countries, the main thing that the Russians have been pushing for is to restore the neutrality of Ukraine. So this is the key issue in any peace agreement. Nothing is more important than this for the Russians. Again, they show that they were willing to go to war for this. So this is completely off the table. That means no NATO membership, but also they've extended it to no de facto membership, because NATO tends to pursue a kind of incrementalism. They move in with some troops, and then they build up a weapon system, missiles, and ends up with a de facto membership. So Russia said very clearly that they will not accept, under any circumstances, any security guarantees which results in any troops from NATO countries to be stationed in Ukraine. So they can call themselves European or EU or whatever it may be, but they're still from NATO countries. And the way that the Russians sees this is the war in Ukraine has been a proxy war between NATO and Russia. So to have NATO soldiers now somehow be used there as peacekeepers is considered unacceptable. And as Boris Johnson and Marco Rubio has also admitted, this is a proxy war. So this means that NATO can't really have much of a role in as peacekeepers or providing security guarantees to begin with, because if there would be security guarantees involving the NATO countries, then there would be too great of an incentive to restart conflicts if the NATO countries would then join the war on the side of Ukraine.
Right. And how positive are you, though, regarding the ceasefire talks? So Trump seems that there is a good vibes coming in from Russia, or what do you think?
Well, I think the Americans and the Russians effectively want the same thing. They want the war to end. It's the conditions around it which they can't really agree upon yet. However, so far there's been some reason for optimism. That is, under Hegseth, they did accept that there would be no NATO expansion. Ukraine would have to accept some loss of territories, and also that there couldn't be any U.S. security guarantees. But still, there's a lot of things to be worked out, and also they have to sell this to the American political establishment, to the Europeans and the Ukrainians. But overall, you have these three issues, and I think on the neutrality, land, and minority rights. Now, interestingly enough, the only thing I think that the Russians are willing to make compromise on is the land. That is, where do the borders go? Here it's possible to make compromises. On the other hand, land is also, by Russia controlling the territory, it also ensures for the Russians that this territory can't be used in the future by NATO as a spearhead against Russia. And also by having these territories under Russian control, it also ensures the right of Russian minorities. So this is why it's going to be very, very difficult. And given the complete absence of trust now, it's going to be very hard to make an agreement. But again, nobody wants this to continue. So I think there is reason for optimism, but it's not going to be easy. But this is a first step, I think.
All right, and it's very interesting because we know that military leaders from, UK and the allies of Ukraine are also taking place. They're having a meeting on Thursday. What do you expect from that?
Well, the Europeans seem very concerned that the war would end in an unfavorable way. Also one which cuts the West out of Ukraine, because once that happens, the US will leave Ukraine. And if the US leaves Ukraine, they already signaled that they would like to reduce their presence in Europe. So this is not just a defeat for Europe in a proxy war, but it also could entail almost collapse in geopolitical relevance. So there's a lot of desperation. I'm not sure what the British are talking about when they're saying putting troops on the ground and planes in the sky. Macron said that he doesn't care what Russia thinks about European peacekeepers, but the Russians have made it very clear that if the European armies begin to appear in Ukraine, they will be considered legitimate targets. So he should care. Otherwise, we have abandoned the reason a long time ago. So I think this is a bit of panic in Europe. The Europeans aren't really sure what to do, and they don't really have any good alternatives. Yet they just know that this will not end well for the Europeans. So far, this seemed to be pushing towards only continuing or prolonging the war, and it's unclear what these troops on the ground would be aimed to achieve if they not actually backed by the United States either. So
absolutely,
it's a very strange time.
Absolutely, and that's really rightly put. Of course, you have to see what happens after the talks tomorrow. Lots to discuss after that. But thank you so much, Dr. Glenn Dyson, for joining us and giving your perspective.